Welcome to the Perspective Podcast. Josue here. As you guys probably already know, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I attended the Oral Roberts University. I'm a fellow believer and presently live here in Dallas, Texas. And with me we have Chase Brown. He is a native of North Texas. He attended University of North Texas, the UNT. Nobody calls it that. He's an aspiring philanthropic creative, and as you guys know, it is May 12th, and he still loves her long walks on the beach. Why that is, we have no idea. So let's get into this episode. Chase, how you doing?
Doing well, man. And you are correct that no one calls it the UNT.
No, not at all. It'd be kind of weird if people did call it that.
It's it'd be quite weird, but it's funny though, and I'm doing good. Been a really good last few weeks, and excited. Got our boy Chaz coming in town,
Mr. Smith,
here in a day or two.
Yeah.
Just gonna chill here, and then also our buddy Montel Fish.
Oh.
And his best
Mr.
friend
Fish.
Dante are coming in town for a couple days, and then going down to Houston for a buddy's wedding. I'm gonna take care of some Alphalete stuff down there while we're down there, and then come back up and have a good time. So really looking forward to that. Yeah, man. How are you?
I'm good, man. I don't understand why it's cold outside, chilly. It was just pretty hot the other day, and then there's just something about Texas that causes the weather to change up on us last minute. But we're used to it by now if you've been here for any amount of years. But as you guys already know, usually whenever we have a podcast, we bring on special guests. But today we're going to switch it up a little bit. It's going to be Chase and I. We wanted to speak about leadership a little bit. If you remember from the very beginning, we always highlight how, we still are learning as people and wanting to continue to learn. So this is just some of our perspective on, leadership and what we've seen, what we're learning, and hopefully able to grow into some more. So Chase, kick us off a little bit on, I know you had a couple thoughts on this, or just how we could, curate this conversation and go from there.
Yeah. It's something that, you and I have kind of been interested in and fascinated about over the last few months in specific. And ever since we had that conversation with Neb, where he brought up a lot of things with leadership and delegation, things along those lines, it sparked a lot of thoughts in us. You from a young adults ministry perspective, and me from specifically perspectives, but also work a little bit. And so really wanted to dive into some of the things in this short podcast that I learned back in 2014 when I did a study of David, and then kind of get your thoughts on that, and then kind of go from there. But first, before we get to that, do you want to share your general thoughts on what do you think are some of the characteristics or the main characteristic of a Christian leader?
Yeah, I think one of the overarching things that, if we're talking about from a Christian perspective, when it comes to leadership, Jesus told them, for you to be the greatest, you have to be a servant of all. So I think that's that one thing when it comes to, our Christian faith that the Lord really requires of us, and really highlights a good leader, in my opinion anyways, is being able to serve people. We oftentimes think of leadership as this person who's in front, making all the rules and laws and doing all these different things. But I think a Christian leader, their life should be marked by how much they're willing to serve others. So in a way, leadership is tied in very, very much with being able to serve others. So to the effect where you become so big-headed, you become so into yourself that you don't see the need to serve others anymore. I think that's kind of where you can begin to go wrong, know?
And then, frankly, aren't aware of the needs of others.
Right.
Because, you're just so much thinking of yourself.
Yeah, and it makes it, I feel like serving others is I don't want to say simple, but it's something that we all could do. So in that sense, we could all be in some form of leadership. Obviously, there's talents and gifts and different things that come into play, but I think we can all serve people.
Yeah, and I'll say that's because we didn't talk about that beforehand, that particular part, and I think that's really affirming to us in that our little slogan is serve people, change perspectives, and it's something that I hope that God is really developing our heart of humility and leadership, and that being a focus, and that we stay committed to that. And then it's really cool. Something that I'll share real quick before I get to my list is was talking with Chaz yesterday about the trip and just planning some things out for days that we're currently free. And told him that Sunday morning we have our monthly homeless outreach with Deep Love and Raul and all them. And so whenever I told him that, I was like, hey, you might need to go to church with like Josiah or someone else if you want to go to Mercy Culture or like Gateway or wherever. He's like, no, man, I want to come with you. I'm like, for real? Like Chaz, like the millions of people influencer and all that stuff wants to come serve. He's like, yeah. And I think that's so cool because I think he, in that obedience, is partnering well, that time creating and that time making awareness for particular things with action. And I would definitely love to see a lot more people that are in that creative or influencer space kind of dive into that. And I think it takes a level of humility to do that because you're so used to getting credit for X, Y, or Z and not doing like the small little things. And so I wanted to give him a shout out for that because that was super cool.
Yeah.
So now kind of getting to the list, which providing a little bit of context to it. Back in 2014, I did a study of David in the Bible and his life with basically two questions of one, what did he do to prepare for war and tough times? And then what were some of his characteristics that made him such a great leader and just like a man after God's own heart? During that time, I was just interested in it because of being an athlete and being a captain. It was something I was like, okay, like I want to learn about this. But it's super cool because I haven't dug these up in, almost 5 or 6 years now. So interested to see, I haven't even looked at these yet.
Yeah.
Interested to see what I'm going to have down. So you can elaborate on these as I go down the list and we'll go from there. But first thing, he honored his promises and cared deeply about his people and was faithful to his friends.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, I do too. He networked very well and treated strangers with respect. And I think that's super interesting because also with Abraham, it's something that either God commanded or God applauded him for like welcoming strangers and treating them well. And I think it's definitely interesting that you can tell something from someone's heart of like with strangers, to backtrack there, I think it was Marty of Social Club that said something like, you can tell someone's intentions when you tell them no, but also whenever they serve people who can't do anything for them. Because then from there, like if you're doing something for someone who like you want something from or can do something for you, it's just like, okay, where's your motivations really at?
Yeah.
And with a stranger, you don't actually know like anything about them. And so inherently, at least for me, you're kind of like serving them without any motivations behind it. Because like you don't know if they could give you anything or not. You're just trying to serve and love.
Yeah. I mean, there's this interesting verse. I think it's in Hebrews 13. It says to be mindful to entertain strangers, because in doing so, some have entertained angels. What that means, I have no idea. But there's something, like to your point, there's something about that God commands us or calls us as believers to the way that we treat strangers, because he says in doing so, some people entertain angels. What that means, I have no idea. But I think it speaks to something. Maybe that's for you guys to kind of go back and pray about. But it does say a lot, because during that time with the children of Israel and all of that, they had strangers and foreigners in their land. And God was like, you guys are not about to treat them like, trash. Like they're just so beneath you guys. You got to, the way you treat them is very important, so. Yeah.
I love that. Third thing, he was in constant communication with the Lord. And along with this, he trusted God's protection and seeked his plan and will in everything. I think that's so interesting because I think as leaders, we can sometimes want to come off as having everything planned out and knowing everything to then instill confidence in those that we're leading. Whereas I think it's interesting where in this, he like really tried to follow the Father rather than acting like he had it all together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's that struggle, right? Where it's like trusting God for things, provision, in terms of like whatever it is that He's called you to. Trusting God for provision in those moments, like you said, versus just leaning on your own strength or understanding or whatever it might be. You know, I think that's a key thing, man. That's big, especially the more people you're able to influence, the more you can't just pretend like you have everything figured out in that kind of way. So
Yeah, man.
yeah.
Love that. So fourth thing, which was also something I wrote down for the third question that I kind of had for this in my like personal study of like what made what made David a godly man. So I had it down for both of these. He had control over his emotions. He didn't hold grudges. He showed gentleness in the reprimands of his people and showed kindness and humility. I think it's so cool because Montel had a post it was a few weeks ago that really, really resonated with me of like, emotions can sometimes be good, but like we can't always trust or like follow or be ruled by like our emotions. And it's something that I think in this time of like relativity and emotions and feelings and all of that, we can sometimes have them, dominate our mind and dominate the day.
Yeah. Following your emotions, they change so much. One day you like this, one day you love it, the next day you hate it. So that's not a constant thing for us as people to kind of put your hopes towards, anyways, because, your emotions change so much for that to be like the thing that, not impacts your life, but that directs your life, to that degree. So,
yeah. And it's something where like the people who you're leading, like if you're so swayed by your emotions,
right.
then like you don't have a stable ground to stand on. Therefore, like they don't have a stable ground to stand on, and they don't trust you in being firm and like trustworthy in everything that you're doing.
Yeah,
like it goes on them also. So, fifth thing, he didn't give in to peer pressure, but still admitted his mistakes, which I think goes a little bit again towards humility and just not trying to have that like perception of being perfect.
Yeah, I think there was that time where they're in the cave, and I think Saul was there, and his people were like, man, we should just kill him right now. He was like, nah, because they were like, this dude has been trying to kill you all this time. Here's our opportunity to kill him. And David, like you say, he didn't fall into that peer pressure, to want to kill Saul because he's like, that's not right for me to do, So I think that's such a big thing, in leadership, not falling to peer pressure. Obviously, there's something difference between like wise counsel and peer pressure. Those are two different things. So, peer pressure from just the world or outside influences forcing you to do something. I think it's a little bit different.
So, an interesting question that I'll throw your way going off of this. Do you think that we within the church today have sometimes hindered leaders admitting their mistakes, confessing their sin because of the lack of grace that we sometimes show for leaders that fall?
Of course, yeah. I mean, whenever a leader falls, it's like, I don't even know what to compare it to. It's like that world ends or something like that. So as a leader, especially within the church, where, we do forget that, people will stumble and stuff like that. We do forget that we do need to show grace. So whenever a leader does fall, it's like, we're crushed. This person was never used by God or a false prophet this whole time. It's like, whoa, it wasn't all that. They just fell, So it's hard to receive grace when you're a leader within the church. So it kind of causes that perception of needing to be perfect. It causes people to want to be more perfect because you can't afford to fall because you're not about to receive grace. So.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting question because I don't think either of us have an answer for this right now. But I think it's an interesting question to think about is like, how do we balance these ideas of like showing grace to individuals and leaders that fall while still maintaining and holding true that leaders are held to a higher standard than others. Like, I don't really know what that balance looks like and how we as the body should like respond whenever leaders like do have, moral failings or things along those lines.
Yeah, I want to say Galatians 6 tells us to restore people with the spirit of gentleness. There's something about being able to restore somebody, because oftentimes whenever people do fail, we just throw them to the side. In my mind, I'm like, if that's the case, we got to throw most of the Bible people to the side, except for Jesus. Even David, whom like you said you were studying, man, we look at his life and there were so many areas where he failed, but God didn't throw him to the side. He restored him. And like you said, it's a tough balance, because obviously, somebody's out here just wilding out or doing crazy things. We want to be able to restore you, but maybe you need time off or whatever the situation might be. I don't know. Like you said, we don't have the perfect answer for that. I think that's always something that I've always wanted to know how to address that, because we see that a lot. People stumble and fall, and it's like, what do we do with this? I don't know if I've seen a lot of perfect example of somebody being restored. So
yeah, that's good. Next thing is, which is interesting. The expectations he had for his men, he also had for himself, and through that, that instilled confidence in his men, because they knew that essentially he was going to be capable of doing like what he was asking of them, and that he was up to par, and not just being like a hypocrite in a way.
Yeah, I mean, that's that whole concept of follow me as I follow Christ, right? As Paul says, I'm leaving an example. And I'm like, I feel like this is a good example that you guys should be able to follow. Jesus, being our perfect example, it's that call to follow me, So it's like, obviously he is a perfect standard, a perfect example for us, And it's like, okay, in our humanity, how do we follow somebody who does have flaws and things like that, because they're not perfect? But we do see this gifting that God has given them. We do see this leadership that they have. So like you said, I mean, his men could see like, man, David was a king who would fight in battles with us. So that, being a soldier, you see your general up there fighting. It's like, man, if the general's fighting, you can see it in sports. Whenever Tom Brady or whatever is out there battling, that encourages everybody else to also give in their best efforts, towards that cause. So, as a leader, being able to lead by example. We've heard these cliches since we were young, since we were kids. So people want to follow an example that they can see, not just somebody in the back giving a whole bunch of orders and you're not even doing these things yourself, So
yeah, I love that. Next thing, he had foresight and vision to the future. He was observant. He moved on and didn't focus on the past. And I think this is something that it's interesting, because this professor that I think I brought up once or twice before, that I'm still trying to figure out and discern, the wheat from the chaff in his kind of teaching. Jordan Peterson kind of talks about how like being attentive and just attention and observing what's going on in the world is like one of the biggest things that like oftentimes Christians never really focus on. And that is to our detriment if we don't place that in the high esteem that it deserves to be, because there's so many things that we're going to miss out on, whether it's like God's presence, whether it's needs we can meet in the world, whether it's self-awareness for things that we need sanctification in and improvement in, and so many different things that we will miss out on, and that God does not want us to miss out on if we aren't attentive and if we don't prioritize that.
We have to be, as Uncle Peter says, sober-minded, be watchful for the times. And obviously, like we've talked about so many times, you're not going to be able to solve all the issues around the world, but maybe there are some that are in your capabilities to be able to address or be a part of or whatever the situation might be. But that only comes when you are aware. There's always things going on in the world, but if you're not aware of it, like you're just ignorant to it. Not that you're ignorant, but you're ignorant to that thing that's going on. So yeah, whenever you are aware of something, I think it allows you to be able to address those things, and that comes through just being vigilant or sober-minded or all these other words I guess we could use.
Yeah, and that's super good. And I think the foresight as well speaks to like long-term perspective. And I think that there's so many leaders today, and I think it's because we're in a democratic culture rather than like a monarch, like a kingdom culture of like they're afraid of getting voted out of their position or losing their position if the results are not good in the short term, and therefore sacrifice like long-term benefit for the sake of short-term results just for the sake of them being able to keep their position in a way. To whereas like we need to have so much confidence in the Lord that he is going to either keep us in the position if that's his plan or have something better come along that we're willing to focus on long term rather than short term.
Yeah.
And so second to last one, I think it's called penultimate one. I mean,
okay.
I mean, I know English is not your first language.
It's not. I feel like I've heard of that before, though. Maybe not. I don't know.
He strengthened himself in the Lord. And some of the practical things he did, put good support structure around himself. And so at that point was able to have accountability and encouragement and edification rather than being like a lone wolf in a way.
Yeah, lone wolves don't really do much. You know, it's when you're in a pack, when you're in a group of people that you're able to get through. Ephesians 6:10, one of my favorite verses, it says, "Be strong in the Lord and the power of his might." You know, it's like that causes you to lean on him, you know, for, you know, his strength, his grace, and his empowerment and all those things for whatever you might be going through in life, whatever it is that he's called you, especially if we're talking about leadership. You know, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. And the verses that follow are verses that we're all probably familiar with. The armor of God is what follows that verse, you know. So hopefully that's like an encouragement to somebody in whatever position you might be in. You know, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. So leaning on him, and as Chase said, being in a place where you're able to surround yourself with the right people, you know, because that's really important as well.
Yeah, so good. And then the last one is, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's still worth noting is like, to be great, you have to be grateful. It's something where we saw so many times through like David's Psalms and through these verses that he always had a posture of just gratitude for the Lord, no matter what he was going through, whether it was like death of a family member, or sin, or anything like that. Like he had time for, you know, grieving, repentance, whatever, but he was grateful for the Lord in the midst of that.
Yeah, the old saints, there's a saying they say about gratitude. I can't remember right now, but it sounds good when they say. But yeah, there's something important about being grateful. You know, as a person, I think we're actually called to that. I think there's a Bible verse that talks about that. Just having that posture, that heart of gratitude towards God, and just in small ways and in big ways. You know, we love being grateful when we get a new job, we get promoted, get married, or whatever. But in the small things, you know, being able to wake up today, seeing another day, and being able to move around, whatever the situation might be, we find in the Psalms that David is grateful for those small things as well. You know, I think that's a really good heart posture to have.
Yeah, I love it. And then one last nugget, little extra bonus one here as I was going through my notes is as we see in 1 Samuel 16:13, the Spirit of the Lord was upon David his whole reign. And so just something where David had such a mindset and focus and posture to welcome the presence of the Lord, and to where he honored him so much that like the Lord wanted to be there in a special way. And so having that culture of honor and obedience to the Father.
Yeah.
So
one of the greatest leaders we see in the Old Testament is Moses, you know, as he's leading the children of Israel out of Egypt into, you know, in the wilderness and trying to get them into this promised land. There's a part where God's like, these people are stiff-necked, I should just start over with you. I should just leave them here. And there's a famous verse where God was like, okay, you guys go into the land, but I'm not coming with you. And Moses' response was like, man, if your spirit is not with us, I don't want to go,
Yeah.
And we see this from such a great leader, as I mentioned, Moses, highlighted in the Old Testament. It's like, man, having that heart posture of, if God's presence is not with us, then I don't want to go. I don't want to I don't want to move. There's that song, where you go, I go, what you say, I say. Jesus say, only do what I see the Father do, only say what I see the Father say, So if the presence of God is not with us, then it's like, maybe we shouldn't, move or do or whatever.
Yeah. So good. Well, for this, if y'all are interested in reading through David's life and kind of what I read through with this, well, the verses is 1 Samuel 16 through 1 Kings 2. And then obviously a lot of things in Psalms in that relate to some things in more specific, but that outlines kind of the life of David in like a bibliographical type way. That's probably not the right word.
Definitely not.
Whatever. You have any last things you want to share, man?
Yeah. Last verse, I believe it's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Uncle Paul says, we don't look at ourselves to think that we're sufficient in anything. Our sufficiency comes from Christ, who makes us sufficient as ministers. And I think that's always, as people say in life verses, that's always a verse that I share with people whenever they're about to start something new, whenever they're in a leadership position, whatever it might be, knowing that in and of yourself you are not sufficient for anything, but God is the one that makes you sufficient for what He's called you to. Yeah. So I think it wraps up a lot of your thoughts that you saw in David's life, where David recognized that his sufficiency comes in Christ, comes in God, right? In Christ, whatever. Comes in God, right? So as people, as believers, in the same way, we should be able to recognize that God is the one that makes you sufficient as a parent, as a leader, as a CEO, as a whatever, right? He's the one that makes you sufficient for these things. So it causes you to lean on Him instead of like your own abilities, so.
I love that, man. Hopefully y'all enjoyed that and was able to get something of value out of that. And if y'all would just be praying for us, that we just grow in leadership in the various things that we're doing, that would be great. And we'll be praying for y'all in the various ways that y'all are leaders in your communities, families, XYZ, whatever. Man, so that was a good combo.
Yeah, it was.
I liked it. But that'll be a wrap for us today. If y'all enjoyed today's episode, please just like, comment, share, subscribe. If it's on YouTube, leave a rating. If you're on Apple Podcasts, all that fun stuff. And then, all of our information is in the description below. If you want to support the work that is going on at Perspectives and the outreaches, or if you want to support the podcast, that would be amazing. And so thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, much love. God bless.